You probably don't have a problem eating a cheeseburger or pizza after a long day of work, or grabbing a quick snack and drink at the gas station while you're running errands. In fact, I have no doubt you've done these things multiple times a month without feeling any sense of remorse or disappointment. But what about eating a healthy grilled chicken salad while everyone around you is eating pizza? How about sipping on a cup of freshly made green tea instead of drinking a Coke or Pepsi? Now, that might be too hard. How about walking or lifting weights for an hour? Doesn't sound too appealing, does it? Even though you logically know that preparing meals, eating healthy, and exercising will bring you more benefits in the long run, you probably still prefer watching TV, eating easy food, and scrolling through social media. One might argue that it's obvious why. One activity is easy and doesn't require very much effort, while the others are difficult and, on the surface, less enjoyable. But some people seem to have no problem eating healthy and exercising regularly. Which begs the question, why are some people more motivated to tackle difficult things? And is there a way to make doing difficult things like dieting and exercising easy? To answer this question, we need to look at the brain neurotransmitter dopamine. Dopamine is often considered a pleasure molecule, but that's not quite what it does. Dopamine is actually what makes us desire things, and it's that desire that gives us the motivation to get up and do all sorts of stuff. If you're not sure how powerful dopamine is, let me introduce you to a few experiments neuroscientists did on rats. Researchers implanted electrodes in the brains of rats. Whenever the rat pulled a lever, the researchers stimulated the rat's reward system in the brain. The result was that the rats developed a craving so strong they kept pulling the lever over and over for hours. The rats refused to eat or even sleep. They just kept pressing the lever until they passed out from exhaustion. But then, they reversed this process. The researchers blocked the release of dopamine in the brain's reward center. As a result, rats became so lethargic that even getting up to drink water or eat food was not worth the effort. The rats were essentially starving themselves, and they didn't care. They didn't want to mate. They didn't crave anything at all. The rats lost all motivation to go on with life. However, if food was placed directly in their mouths, the rats would still eat and enjoy the food. They just didn't have the motivation to get up and feed themselves. You would think that it's thirst or hunger that motivates us to get food or water. But dopamine plays the key role here. Dopamine creates the desire to eat and drink and live. Now, the rat experiments might be an extreme example, but you can easily extrapolate the effect dopamine has on humans and our daily lives. In fact, your brain develops priorities largely based on how much dopamine it's expecting to get. If an activity releases too little dopamine, you won't have much motivation to do that activity. But if an activity releases a lot of dopamine, you'll be motivated to repeat it over and over. So which behaviors release dopamine? Any activity where you anticipate there's a potential reward will release dopamine. But if you know there are no immediate rewards with the behavior, your brain won't release it. For example, before you eat comfort food, your brain releases dopamine because you anticipate that the food will make you feel good, even if it actually makes you feel worse. That's because your brain doesn't even care if the high dopamine activity is damaging to you. Your brain just wants more. An easy example would be the brain's reaction to drugs. A drug addict or alcoholic knows that what they are doing is not good for them, but all they want is to get more alcohol or drugs. Besides getting you high, alcohol and drugs like cocaine and meth release unnatural amounts of dopamine, which in turn makes you crave them even more. Of course, it has to be noted that nearly everything releases some amount of dopamine. Even drinking water when you're thirsty releases dopamine. Just not near as much as drugs or video games or high-fat carby foods. The highest dopamine release happens when you get a reward randomly. One such example is playing on a slot machine in a casino. Even if you've only been losing money until that point, you eventually expect to get a bigger reward. You just don't know when it could happen. And in today's digital society, we are flooding our brains with unnaturally high amounts of dopamine on a daily basis, even if we don't know it by scrolling through social media, websites, and playing video games. We anticipate some sort of reward with each one of those behaviors. That's why we're constantly checking our phones. We expect to see a text message or some other notification, and we know that eventually we're going to receive some sort of stimulation from our phones. We've become like those rats pulling the lever trying to get a new dopamine hit. And you might think it's harmless, but you'd be wrong. Our bodies have a biological system called homeostasis. It means that our body likes to keep internal physical and chemical conditions at a balanced level. Whenever an imbalance occurs, our body begins to adapt to it. Let me give you an example. When it's cold outside, our body temperature falls. And as a result, we start shivering to generate heat and warmth. However, when it's hot outside, our body temperature rises. In this case, we start sweating to lose some of that heat. Essentially, our body is looking to maintain a temperature of around 37 degrees Celsius or 98 degrees Fahrenheit. But the other way homeostasis manifests itself is through tolerance. For example, someone who rarely drinks alcohol will feel the effects of alcohol fast. Someone who drinks on a regular basis will have to drink more alcohol because their body has developed a tolerance to it. Essentially, it takes more and more alcohol to make them have the same effect, and that's called tolerance. It's no different with dopamine. Your body tries to maintain homeostasis, so if you are flooding your brain with dopamine, your body actually decreases the number of dopamine receptors. The high levels of dopamine have to stay high or get higher because you don't have as many receptors now. In this case, you've developed a dopamine tolerance. This can be a huge problem because the things that don't give you as much dopamine, like a salad and steamed broccoli, don't interest you any longer. Pizza, French fries, ice cream, and soda all stimulate much higher levels of dopamine release than the salad or steamed broccoli. So it's much more difficult to motivate yourself to eat the healthy food and say no to indulgences. Healthy feels boring and less fun. Years of processed food has made our dopamine tolerance so high that healthy, oil-free, plain foods aren't able to match it. Once our dopamine tolerance gets too high, we simply aren't able to enjoy low dopamine behaviors. Which begs the question, is there anything that can be done to prevent this or correct it? The answer is a health dopamine detox. You might already have an idea of what dopamine detox is, and most of the time it's in reference to putting away your phone or other electronics, but when we talk about health and wellness, it's a little different. What you're going to do is set aside a week where you're going to avoid all the high dopamine releasing foods and activities. You're going to stop flooding your brain with high amounts of dopamine via food and electronics, and you're going to let your dopamine receptors begin the recovery process. Just a disclaimer. If you're suffering from any kind of eating disorder, then I suggest you seek professional help. Now back to the detox. For one whole week, you will try to have as little fun as possible. You won't be using the internet or any technology like your phone or computer. You're not allowed to listen to music, scroll social media, or eat any processed food. You're going to eat foods like plain chicken or steak and steamed veggies with no seasoning, oil, or butter. And you're going to drink water, plain water. Basically, you're going to remove all sources of external pleasure for the entire week, especially food-based pleasures. You're going to embrace boredom. You are basically allowed to do the following. Eat the most boring foods you can think of. Drink lots of water. And go for a daily walk. Enjoy nature and listen to your breathing. Reflect on your life and your goals. All of this might seem quite intense, but if you want radical results and you want them fast, you need to be able to take radical action. Now you might be asking yourself, why would this even work? You can think of it this way. Let's say that you've been eating every single meal at your favorite restaurant in town. As a result, those fancy meals became your new normal. If someone offers you a bowl of plain rice, you would probably refuse. The plain rice simply wouldn't taste as good as your usual restaurant meal. But if you suddenly find yourself stranded on the side of the highway with no phone and no credit cards and you haven't eaten all day, suddenly that bowl of plain rice doesn't seem so bad. And that is what the dopamine detox does. Dopamine detoxes work because you become so bored that boring stuff becomes more fun. Of note, it often takes your dopamine receptors 90 days, or even more, to recover from the high dopamine release activities. 1 week might not be a long enough detox, but it's certainly a great start. During your week, you will walk without music or looking at your phone. You will eat the most boring, unprocessed foods you can think of, and learn to appreciate how much better you feel. No more mid-afternoon energy crashes. You'll start sleeping better at night. You can enjoy the healthy stimulation from a walk around your neighborhood. Focus on the positive feelings of taking care of your brain and body, instead of focusing on what you are missing out on. Yes, you will feel bored, but that's the point. You want to let your dopamine receptors recover from the unnaturally high dopamine that's been flooding your brain. And boredom is going to allow you to do other things now that you aren't so occupied with finding fatty, carby foods and finding a new show on Netflix. These new things may be things that you would normally put off, because they don't release as much dopamine, like fixing something around your house, tidying up your landscaping, or finishing the laundry that's been piling up. And because you're already bored, it's easier for you to do these things. The overall goal is to connect more dopamine to the things that will actually benefit you. After eating boring, bland food for a week, a juicy peach will taste amazing. Or maybe water with a slice of cucumber and a squeeze of lemon. Over time, you will become used to less salty, less processed foods. Then when you do have a cheat meal, you might find your body is not happy. Your heart rate goes up, maybe you get a headache or need a nap, or your GI system goes into overdrive. Those foods that were your normal become less desirable when you feel how they affect you. Instead of watching TV for an hour, you'd rather take a leisurely walk with your significant other around the neighborhood or local park. Over time, you become happy with the healthy foods and exercise, and want to avoid the undesirable side effects of laziness and overindulgence. The key here is, you have to learn to appreciate the simplicity of natural food and exercise. If you can change your thought process from one of deprivation to appreciation, then you have successfully tricked your brain to enjoy dieting and being healthy. In the end, it is possible to make doing difficult things feel easier. But when your brain is getting so much dopamine all the time, you won't be as excited about working on something that doesn't release much of it. That's why you might want to limit your phone and computer usage, along with other high dopamine releasing behaviors during this detox time. So if you have motivation problems when it comes to diet and exercise, start dopamine detoxing your brain as soon as possible. Separate yourself from the unnaturally high amounts of dopamine, or at least expose yourself to it far less frequently. Only then will normal, everyday, low dopamine activities become exciting again, and you'll be able to do them for longer. We are all dopamine addicts to a certain extent. And it's a good thing, because dopamine motivates us to achieve goals and improve ourselves. But it's up to you to decide where you're going to get your dopamine from. Are you going to get it from looking and feeling good, or are you going to get it in the drive-thru? The choice is yours. As always, thanks for watching. I hope this video helps, and we'll see you next time.